On behalf of the Advisory Board for Executive Voices, I would like to welcome you all to today's event. My name is Amanda Raker-Kimmelman. I'm with Mercer, and I have the pleasure of kicking us off today. So this is, believe it or not, our 8th Executive Voices event. And we are back where it all started, at Western Union. So way back in 2019, Anna hosted a group here at Western Union, and we did not know at the time that this was going to become such a thing, which is so neat. But I have to say, the Colorado business community is a really special place. So I don't know how many of you out there are new to our state, but there is something really special about the collaboration and the collaborative spirit that is Colorado business. And Executive Voices is one of those examples. We are so glad to have executives from Colorado being willing to share their authentic views and perspectives on leadership issues with other executives in a space where we can network and be together and learn and develop. And it really is something special. So I want to thank all of you for being a part of that and for being here with us today. But we could not do this without our generous sponsor and host, Western Union. So I would like to introduce Claire Tracy. She is the leader of external communications here at Western Union, to just say a few words about why Western Union has us here today. And we just want to give her a big round of applause and thank Western Union for having us.
Thank you, Amanda. So my name is Claire Tracy, and it's my pleasure really to welcome you all to our global headquarters this afternoon, and specifically to our meeting and conference space, which we call our Grand Staircase. I hope you also managed to grab a cocktail in the summit before you came through, but if not, I encourage you to do so at the end of the proceedings, as there are some wonderful views to be seen and appreciated. We moved into this building in late 2018 rather, and as a proud Denver company, we really wanted to look for opportunities to really open the space up to our community, and also just to really be a resource to our fellow local business leaders and innovators. We're pleased to be able to offer up this space for presentations, events, and meetings, all of which bring in new and diverse voices, ideas, and experiences, which can have a positive impact on our community, our employees, our customers, and indeed our neighbors. As this evening's event certainly, I think, brings that to the fore and fits the bill for what is required, and we are excited to welcome back the Executive Voices Speaker Series and host them for this evening's event. In our own 171-year history, Western Union has weathered many crises, both large and small, and we understand that being a responsible business leader means having open, fair, and transparent communications with all of our stakeholders. And it is certainly an important topic, and we look forward to really sharing our lessons with you here this evening, and also listening to your experiences and what we can learn from those going forward. So with that, and without further ado, I will hand you back to Amanda, and we will kick off this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire and Western Union. So it is my pleasure to also introduce Anna Conrad, who is the founder of Executive Voices, as well as the CEO of Impact Leadership Solutions. So Anna's mission is to help create leaders that people want to follow in places that people want to work. and it's a very important mission. And Anna has a lot of really great tips. You'll have to excuse the occasional expletive that Anna likes to throw into the mix. I can say that Anna's been featured in a number of publications, including, I have to look at the list here to make sure I don't forget any, Fast Company, Chicago Tribune, the Denver Business Journal, and over 300 radio shows. She's also an author, and I'll say that she's just a really great friend. She's really inspirational, and she truly cares about the people that she works with and interacts with. So Anna, thank you so much for having me be a part of this, and I'll pass it over to you to get us started.
Thank you, Amanda. Oh, a blush. I also want to thank, and then we'll be done thanking for a few minutes, but I do want to thank my advisory board as well, because you guys, there is so much work that goes on behind the scenes for this event. I mean, Western Union, Claire has done such an amazing job. Beth as well, Beth Gangle, they're so wonderful. But my advisory board really helps drive what we're going to be talking about. And that is, of course, Amanda Rako Kimmelman at Mercer. We have Kay Tierney, Tierney Talent Ventures, and of course, the fabulous Patty Fontenot, who you guys, yes, everybody like bows down to Patty, who she is also, those of you who have been to Executive Voices before might have heard her on the panel, because if we have panelists that like don't show up or there's something that happens, it's always like, hey, Patty, got a minute? She's like, sure. By the way, how many of you have been to an Executive Voices event before? You see a show of hands? Wow, awesome. And those of you that haven't been here, make certain to mingle and to meet other people. Don't just stick with your posse, because you guys, we have people here from Vail Resorts. We have people from, of course, from 9 News. I forgot, Jessica, what's the new company that you're with? Oh, sorry, Energy Cap. Sorry, got a little woo there. We've got people from iLending. I mean, just almost every industry you can imagine is represented in the room today. Teletech, or it's T-Tech now, right? I'm so old school. T-Tech, we have Dish, and of course we have Hazelden Construction back there too. Yay, go Hazelden. So let's now turn to our panelists, and we have amazing panelists. So Sherry Axelrod, who doesn't she have the coolest last name ever, by the way, Axelrod, so cool. Sherry has been a client and a friend of mine for more years than I can even remember, and Sherry's job, her new job, it's Chief Enterprise Risk Officer. It's a crazy title, right? And if you think she was the first person that we thought of when we decided to do a discussion on leading through crisis, because that's her job. I mean, her job is to make certain that there's not as many crises at Western Union as needed. She heads up as needed. Did I say as needed? Oh my God. Not that many crises. Oh, as needed. We always need a little bit of crisis, don't we? Makes it fun and interesting.
Plus is more.
That's true. Well, job security, right? And so Sherry heads up, you didn't say heads up, you say coordinates. Compliance, internal audit, I'm missing one. And risk, thank you, and risk. Pretty cool. And by the way, if you ever can snag an invitation to our holiday party, grab it, because it is the best holiday tea I've ever had. So she is our first panelist. And then we have Kelly Duncan. So Kelly heads up Community First Foundation, which is actually, it's pretty cool. It's a nonprofit, it's a tech platform that helps other nonprofits through crisis. It's really interesting. Not as interesting, though, as Kelly herself, because she was actually, somebody asked her if she wanted to try out for the circus. All these things you learn at our events, right? Grab a cocktail and ask her about that after the discussion. And then we have Mark Carnetta. Mark is from, okay, got some hoops? Go ahead, Blair. Yeah, all right. Mark brought his own peeps here, as you can see. Mark is president and general manager for 9 News. And he's also SVP for Tegna, or is it Tenga? I always get those mixed. Tegna, thank you. For Tegna, so he oversees not just 9 News, but other radio stations in other markets as well. And when we think about crisis, I mean, you think about the media's response to crisis. It's really interesting. So as you can imagine, between our 3 panelists today, we got a lot of cool things to cover. So let's start off with hearing about your own personal stories. And since I'm a control freak, I have the order that you're going to go in, and you're not going to deviate it from it. Mark, would you mind starting us off, please?
Sure. Can you guys hear me? Yep. Okay. First of all, when we were assembling, someone talked about a memo for shoes tonight, and apparently I didn't get it. But the truth is, had I gotten the memo, I wouldn't have been able to comply anyhow. So I just want to get that out of the way. This is a topic that I think is important to all of us, and I'm glad we have a great representation of the community, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when a crisis will hit your organization or your people. And as I thought about this, the way I want to address this question is just simply, in preparing for this, just looking at who did it right, who got it wrong. There are so many great examples of failure when crises hit. And there are some just unbelievable examples of when people have gotten it right. But make no mistake, people aren't going to judge you by the crisis. They're going to judge you by your response to the crisis. And I think of an example when I was growing up, and I think some of you, based on age, probably weren't born yet, but in 1982, there was a crisis that hit the Chicago community, the Tylenol tampering crisis. And tablets were laced with cyanide, 7 people passed away, and to this day, there's still nobody that was ever linked to having done this. Tylenol had a huge PR problem to deal with. And the way they dealt with that problem actually propelled Johnson & Johnson and the company moving forward, because it could have literally taken the company out. But the way they dealt with it was extraordinary. They really didn't have anything to do with the poisoning of these individuals or lacing, the bottles. But what they did is take responsibility for not having created a tamper-proof container. And it revolutionized the industry. We can't buy anything today that isn't tamper-proof, right? It's got the seal, it's got the special, label over the top of it. And the way they dealt with that, they turned an utter disaster, people dying, into probably like a sort of a savior in the community, just about the way they handled it. They took responsibility and they stepped up and took ownership. They recalled, it cost them tens of millions of dollars to do this, but it was the right thing. And obviously the company's around today to talk about it. But I think about that and just all the examples over the years of dealing with individuals that we cover in the news that have a crisis themselves and decide not to talk or decide to, blame somebody else, and how it turns out to be a disaster. So I'm actually anxious to hear the rest of the panelists talk about this, because it's really a critical thing that all of us, if we haven't dealt with it, we're going to.
That's great. Yeah, and to Mark's point, it's how people show up during crisis. If you think about your own leadership, we have Paxite, we have Ping Identity, who's going through, excuse me, I'm voice. Oh my gosh. So my husband's here. He's going to be so happy because I'm not going to have a voice by the end of the day. I've been on coaching calls since 6:30 this morning. But it's how leaders show up during crisis. It's how they handle it that impacts their organization. It impacts their leaders, both during the crisis course, as well as the aftermath, the leaders that are left standing and the people that are left standing. So Kelly, I mean, I know we kind of skipped over the whole personal thing. Tell us a little bit about yourself personally, and then would you share a crisis with us, something that you helped with?
I'd love to share my crises. So, Kelly Duncan, thank you so much for having me here. As was mentioned, I'm the president and CEO of Community First Foundation. So I'll quickly explain who we are, tell you how I got here, and then talk about a crisis that we had to deal with. So Community First Foundation is a community foundation. A lot of you are going, yeah, that's not helping me. So what a community foundation does is two things. On one side, we help donors, whether they're individual, organizational, or corporate, create what I think of as charitable giving accounts. We hold that money for them and they advise us where they want distributions to go. We also make grants to nonprofits in Jefferson County, Colorado. Our fundraising we do throughout the state, grants we make in Jefferson County. We also recognize that to open an account, a charitable giving account, you need quite a bit of money. You need some discretionary income in order to do that. But we think everybody loves the opportunity to give and give back. So I can take no credit for this, but before my time, someone had the brilliant idea to create an online giving platform, and it's called Colorado Gives. We continue to run Colorado Gives 365, and we have nonprofits on the site, and we make a pledge to donors that if you decide you want to support a nonprofit on our site, you can rest assured they truly are a nonprofit. They have their IRS designation as a 501c3. They're in good standing with the Secretary of State, and you're going to get a tax receipt from us for that donation. It's also like online shopping, so while Mark can't get shoes on the site, you can make as many donations as you want to as many organizations as you want, differing amounts, and you put it all in a shopping cart, truly, and check out with one transaction. So that site, as you can imagine, in a time of crisis, I think community foundations more and more are called on to help the community heal. And they do that because they can both help with the fundraising and they can also help with the grant making. And because we have this online fundraising tool, people often turn in a time of crisis. They want to do something, but they don't know what to do. But they can give money, right? We can give money, we can give to a fund, we can help. And so we try to position that site in those times of crises to help people feel like they have agency to do something in the healing process. So I'm going to give you this backdrop because any crisis I talk about tonight is important to remember this. At one point, before I was at Community First Foundation, we were asked by the governor after the Aurora Theater shooting to create a fund on Colorado Gives so that people in the community could give to that fund to help with the healing process. Now, there's lots of IRS rules around who you can give to and who you can't give to, and you can't give to individuals. It is not charitable. It's not considered a charitable class for me to say, Jesse was harmed, I'm going to give money to Jesse. That's not allowed. So you can give to nonprofits or helping to heal. Like I see Jefferson Center for Mental Health. We could make grants to Jefferson Center to help people who were impacted by that tragedy. Unfortunately, when the fund was created, it wasn't given in a name that was very clear to the community. And people saw it as a fund that was going to go directly to victims of this terrible tragedy. And when the victims' families who are hurting, they have had the biggest loss that they have ever had. There is nothing but raw emotion. They've been harmed in ways that no one should ever be harmed. They were angry. Very, very angry because they had thought that people stepped up to help them, and yet they weren't getting the help that they thought that they were promised and deserved. And it was terrible for the victims' families. It was also terrible for the organization. We had reporters calling, pretending not to be reporters, trying to trick staff into saying things that they could use in the media. We had death threats to people on our staff. And so after that, there was once bitten, twice shy. We will never do a fund again. We are out of the business of responding to crisis. Well, it's really hard to have an online giving platform and not respond to a crisis. Yeah. So we had an incident in Old Town Arvada. This was on the heels of the Boulder shooting that had happened in the King Soopers. We worked very closely with our friends at the Community Foundation of Boulder to help put up the site, to identify the nonprofits that were taking money to help the community heal. And then we had the shooting in Arvada. And we got a call from a news station to say, hey, we want to direct viewers to give money to help this healing. We need a fund. Oh, we don't do funds. We promised we would ever do a fund again. And so we had to figure out how to handle that. Luckily, we had documented all kinds of lessons learned. We listened to different people in the organization who had different viewpoints, who had not been at the organization in the bad times. So we could take the bad, we're never going to do it, we're going to do it differently. Cindy, who's on our team, said, hey, I think you're missing the bad PR we could get if we don't do a fund. And so we were able to do a fund and respond. But I think the personal was just that fear. What am I doing to the organization? What am I doing to my staff? What if this goes terribly wrong? And we end up in the same situation. Luckily, it didn't happen, and we'll talk more about that later, but that's just one example of a crisis and how we've been called to respond.
That's great. And it's a great example of how during crisis you have to pivot,
Yes.
right? You never know what's going to come up next, and you have to be able to pivot. And we'll definitely talk about that echo chamber later as well. What about you, Sherry? Would you mind telling us a little about yourself and about a crisis?
So first of all, I want to welcome all of you to Western Union, and thank you for being here with us this afternoon, and a huge thank you to Claire for pulling this all together and doing all the hard work. So I need to talk about crisis. I need to explain a bit about Western Union, because I still have people who are like, you're headquartered in Denver? I had no idea. What do? You guys still send telegrams? Well, what do? So we connect families, and we have 120 million customers around the world, and we send money every second of every day, everywhere except banned countries around the world, and we send money in $300 increments. So here's a good example of one of our customers. You are a person in the Philippines, and you decide to leave the Philippines to go to maybe Singapore or come to the US so that you can work to send money back home to make a better life for your children and your family. So oftentimes you've left your children in the Philippines to be raised by a family member, and you've come to the US to work. And every week, either through our mobile app or at one of our retail locations, you go and you send $300 back to your family so that they can have a healthcare, housing, education. So we send billions of dollars around the world to make the lives of people better. And we do more to change the lives of people than the International Monetary Fund, because we are family to family. So when COVID happened, as you all know, we actually were pretty early in the warning, because literally we're in 200 countries and territories. So we were starting to hear things coming out of Asia and China about lockdowns. And then we were starting to hear things in Europe. And literally, I went home on a Friday and thought maybe we would be home for a week, maybe two. Certainly didn't put 2 years, behind that. But our network, we have 600 locations, 600,000 locations around the world, and all the retail locations shut down. So people couldn't travel. So you're in one country, and your family is depending upon you for food in another, for money to buy food in another country. And so we very quickly mobilized as a team. And like I said, we had early warning. So we had our SWAT teams and our task forces and our risk analysis, several weeks probably ahead of most companies, thinking about what to do. So we were able to do several things very quickly. First of all, we have people all over the world. So we got up and went home. We didn't miss a beat. Our technology worked perfectly. So that was a huge help for us, just because we already have people in over 50 countries as employees. Second, we had to say, okay, we need to figure out ways that people can still send money, because we are a lifeline for so many millions of families around the world. So we worked very closely with federal governments, and many of our locations were able to stay open because they were considered essential. And thirdly, we already had a mobile app and an online presence, and we looked at that and we said, what can we do to make this better, easier, faster, so that people can send money through us in ways they haven't before, especially in countries where they can't leave their houses. Because there were countries that not only couldn't you travel, you couldn't walk out the front door. I mean, you could maybe walk around your neighborhood. And so we were able to quickly bring together what I would consider a SWAT team. We met every day for many, many, many weeks. We cut through all the red tape. We made risk-based decisions around, gosh, what if somebody has an expired ID? Normally, we don't accept expired IDs, but in this case, in this situation, we made a risk-based decision to say, well, people aren't going to go and get new IDs, so let's go ahead and make some decisions that put our customers and their families in the center of everything that we do. It allowed us to be pretty innovative and make some choices and see some things work in ways that probably without COVID would have been much slower. But for us, it's all about our customers. It's all about this person who left their home countries to look for a better life somewhere else, and their hard-earned money goes back to those families in ways that we can't even imagine. I mean, so, for us, the crisis was COVID. I would say that we have crisis, we're all over the place. So there's always a hurricane or all sorts of things happening. But for us, it's all about how are we serving those customers and how are we serving their needs.
That's great. And I remember we had an Executive Voices event the day before the world shut down. And I remember getting an email that morning from a Western Union executive, and saying that she wasn't going to be able to make the event because they're not allowed to be, she and the other executives weren't allowed to be in any place where there's more than 50 people. And I'm looking at it going, WTF, what the fruit? So that was what the fruit. This is a bunch of what. But sure enough, the next day, nobody could go anywhere. So that was great. And, and Sherry, sometimes it's not these big crises, right? It's these smaller issues that turn into crisis. And as a leader, I'm sure you have experience with this. Is there something you wouldn't mind sharing with us about what you've done, an example of when an issue was about to come into a crisis, but you went ahead and was able to kind of nip it in the bud or manage it?
So again, we're highly regulated and we work all over the world. So when you think about crises, we try to really look around the corner as best we can, but sometimes you're surprised. This is not necessarily a small crisis, but I don't think we fully anticipated the Russian invasion of Ukraine in exactly the way that it unfolded. I mean, we had been following Russia as a hotspot for a very, very long time. We had a very big business in Russia. And so what you have to do, especially, is think ahead. What's the next crisis that could be coming up? And how do you have a plan in place so that when it does happen, you know where to go next. You know who to bring in the room, you know who to talk to, you know what decisions that need to be made. In our case, we generally have to have a lot of conversations with our regulators to make sure to keep them abreast of the things that we're doing. And then we also have to be very cognizant of where our employees are. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, we have a very, very large operating center in Vilnius, Lithuania, a couple thousand of our employees. So for those of you who maybe your Lithuanian history is not necessarily as up to date, they have only been an independent country for 30 years. They would say, controlled or under Russia, not by their choice, certainly, since World War II. And so when that happened, and they now have this border and Russia's coming, our employees had varying degrees of, I would say, reactions. And we had to work very carefully with our employees, make them feel supported, make them feel that they were a part of an organization that very much cared about them. And there was a lot of strong emotion happening there. And we had as a company to make hard decisions. And you all saw this playing out about companies that left Russia. We did. We left Russia and Belarus. And we made the decision that given what was happening there and that we no longer could stay and do business. We had employees in Russia that we had to be very cognizant of their safety and what we do, how we supported them. But what happens is these crises are rarely one-dimensional. And here you had to really make all the right decisions. We had to keep our customers in the center of the decisions we were making. We had to support our brand. We're a 171-year-old company with a very strong brand, and we had to support our employees. And so that's having the right conversation. That's having hard conversations, but it's always keeping our true north on what our values are.
That's great, thank you. And Mark, being in media, I can only imagine some of the small issues you've had.
We don't have any issues.
You just create them. Would you mind sharing with us just some of that, or at least one of them?
Well, there's a lot I really can't share. I would say, I'll just share something that happens infrequently, but it happens, where our organization has a very defined separation between our editorial team and our business, selling advertising. And oftentimes conflicts occur because the news organization is doing an investigative series on purchasing automobiles. If you didn't know, automobiles, first of all, they're really hard to come by now, but automobiles are a significant component of a media company's business. It could represent upwards of 25% of our business. And it's happened before where we go out and do an investigation and you get the threatening phone calls from advertisers that we're going to cancel all our advertising if you come into my dealership or if you try to do a story on us. And our news organization never hears from me or the business office about this. They don't know that that's happening. I don't know if they even think about it, but they shouldn't. because they need to be able to make independent decisions. It creates a great deal of anxiety for the business office when you have large customers that are threatening, particularly when you're in a down economy, and you pretty much have to just understand that this is what a free press is all about, right? And recently we were doing a story on essentially a dismissal of a teacher at Valor Christian. And it was, I believe, a Sunday night. I got a phone call from one of our customers saying, if you do this story, I'm pulling, and this is a very large customer, I'm pulling all my advertising. And as the news managers would say, they never heard from me about this. I really just wanted to know what the story was. And I got back to this individual on Monday, and it really infuriated me that they thought they could, stop us from doing something like that. But honestly, I think with transparency and just sort of setting the record straight about the do's and don'ts, what we do as an organization needs to be independent as we make editorial decisions without any sort of outside influence. And as a general manager, I don't influence what's going on in the news. And I think that was a surprise to this individual that, well, I know you, I thought you could just turn it off. And I think they were shocked that that's not how it works. And hopefully now they have a better respect for that entire process as it unfolds. But that's one thing I can share with you. And a week ago we were meeting to have this pre-meeting, and we had a little bit of, I wouldn't call it a crisis, but an issue. And I can tell you the difference between an issue and a crisis. We had an issue where we use a texting software company that's a sort of connector between us and our audience, and their company got hacked, and suddenly several 100,000 texts went out, not really here in Colorado, but in the West Coast mostly, with basically a phishing scam for Bitcoin, and I think the other was a Visa card or something like that. And our newsroom got lit up over this, and so it created a lot of hassle for the organization, but it didn't damage the organization's reputation. And that's a critical component of decision making when you have a crisis or an issue. Is this something that's likely to damage our reputation? I just, we touched on it a little bit here, where Western Union has a definitive plan where they put a group together. If you don't have a plan, you need to put a plan together. You need to have a checklist so that inevitably when a crisis does happen, and I'll share an example later on where a checklist actually saved a whole bunch of people. But if you don't have such a plan, you need to build one. And I would tell you, I would get rid of any hierarchical structure that you have in the organization, because the person who runs the organization probably doesn't have all the best answers. And they need to understand that fundamentally, that bring people around you that don't think like you, so that you can come up with the best ideas and survive whatever that crisis is. And slow roll, breathe, take your time and make decisions deliberately. And not making a decision is a decision in and of itself. So think about that.
Yeah, that's really great. And that actually leads us to really talking about the echo chamber. If you're like most people, we surround ourselves with people who are like us because it's comfortable. But when you're going through a crisis, that's, as Mark's saying, it's the worst thing that you can do. And Kelly, for you and your group, what do you do to make certain that you're not in that echo chamber?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're right, the person leading the organization is often not the best equipped to make those decisions. So I do think—
I know, and they're all acknowledging it. Get him out of the room.
I do think preparation helps, because when you're in the heat of the moment, you're not thinking the best. You've got a ton of adrenaline, cortisol flowing, and you're probably, sometimes it helps and you make really good quick decisions and you can move. But I think planning ahead, so having that checklist, identifying who's going to come to help decide how you're going to move ahead, who brings what perspective. Because when you're looking at the crisis, everyone's going to experience it differently. So we try to bring people together from across the organization who see the world differently, who see our work differently, who see our customers and experience what our customers are experiencing from different perspectives, and we talk. The other thing we often do is we have a debate, and everyone, you decide this is what we're debating on, and everyone has to do pro and con. So you're forced to look at both sides, and you don't just get the most persuasive lawyer person in the room who can tell you what to do, but you're really forced to look at both sides so that you can start to think about how you mitigate what's going to rise regardless of what decision you make, because no decision is perfect and there's going to be repercussions from it. So if you're aware of those going into it, you can also think about how you mitigate and make plans to prepare for those things when they happen. I also try to find the pessimists. Pessimists are great at this because you're going to think that everything is going to be perfect. So you get those pessimists to tell you everything that's wrong with the things that you're going to do. And you get the quiet people because they're usually observing everything. And when they speak, you want to listen. You know those people in your organization. They don't talk a lot, but when they do, you want to lean in and listen because it's going to be something incredibly insightful. So those are some of the things we do.
And that's really good. And I tell a lot of my coaching clients when I'm working with them to get those people to talk, because especially during crisis, when people are scared, they're not going to want to talk. So instead, you want to ask it in the inverse. For instance, Jenny, since you're right there and you're wearing a beautiful dress and cool boots, so I'm just going to pick on you. And Jenny is not the quiet one. She would definitely talk. It would, say, Jenny, what challenges do you think that we might have if we do this? Or Jess, what do you think the issues might be? So for those of you that are leaders, ask those questions in the inverse, exactly what Kelly's talking about, to the people that are quiet. Okay, totally old here, I'm telling my age. Does anybody remember E.F. Hutton? Remember the E.F. Hutton commercial? All right,
When
Mark.
E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen?
Yes, you want to find your E.F. Hutton, or your E.F. Huttonette, because might be a female, you never know. Go women. We, last Executive Voices event, we talked about burnout. And if any of you guys remember, I talked about burnout and how a big part of burnout, it isn't workload, it's that loss of control. That really is the number one cause of burnout, and is loss of control. So when we're talking about a crisis, that's what you're dealing with here. And Sherry, would you mind sharing with us some of your experience as a leader? How do you keep your energy up? What do you do? And how do you do that with your people too?
Oh gosh, so I've been in my new job not very long, so I haven't been doing a great job on energy recently. But so one, people have to know that they're heard, and they have to feel part of the purpose. So it's really, I have 3 words, and when I first came up with these several years ago, I thought I would come up with 3 new words every year. And now I just keep them because I think that they work. So it's really about cooperation, communication, and transparency. So when you are working in teams, whether it's in crisis or just, hard day-to-day life, the more that you communicate with each other and are transparent in those communications, and then pitch in and help each other, the better off everyone is. So when you're living these words, you start to see where one team maybe is falling down a little bit or is struggling. And when you have those kinds of relationships, another team just steps in to help and prop up. And so when there's so much going on, whether it's just day-to-day hard work, we are all in business here, unprecedented times. It's hard to find necessarily all the right people that you need in your organizations to do the work that you need to have done. Costs are going up, so everybody's sort of struggling with what tomorrow's going to bring. The Fed raised interest rates again this week, so all of us are impacted in our businesses in different ways. But if you can foster this idea of communicating and cooperating and being transparent and being supportive of each other, then I believe that goes a long way for people getting energy and giving energy in great and positive ways, and for being there for team members who are maybe struggling. Because the other thing that I know for certain, not everybody's life is perfect every day. And there are a lot of things that people have going on at home. And one of the things that I think COVID did in a positive way, because we were seeing into people's homes in new and unique ways. And I'll tell a quick story. So at that point, I was chief auditor, and one of my leaders had a 2-year-old. And Pearson was on many Zoom calls, the 2-year-old, and his father, we had our huddle at 11 o'clock every day, and MacArthur's wife also works for Western Union, and so Tori had a meeting at 11 o'clock every day. So MacArthur was on lunch duty for Pearson. So Pearson sat through hours of discussions about everything internal audit. And at one point, I say, MacArthur, do you have anything else to say? Did you have any updates, or do you have any problems that you want to solve? So MacArthur goes off mute and he goes on camera. And Pearson is sitting there and he looks at the camera and he says, "Hi, Sherry." So I've spent so much time with him. So that's knowing your co-workers in a new and different way. And when you have that and you can build those kinds of teams, I think you weather crisis a lot better, because people know each other in new ways and they're there for each other.
And to add a little bit of color to that, Sherry's very humble. She might have been new to this role, but she was the chief audit officer at the time. And if it was your team call, then it was literally people from all over the world. I mean, imagine you guys before COVID being able, you have all of these leaders from all over the world, and it being okay for a 2-year-old to be, "Hi, Sherry," to the boss. It's kind of cool. Our conversation, as always, they can go on forever. I mean, we have so much we can cover, but I want to make certain we have time for Q&A. So let's leave each of you guys, before we open it up, the best piece of advice that you have for people with regards to leading through crisis. Mark, would you mind starting us off?
Yeah, I touched on it already, and that is to have a plan, and to have a group of people that when the shit hits the fan, it rhymes with plan, that when that happens, that you can quickly assemble so that you can start to figure out what is going on, who are the people I need, what are we going to do about this, what's our communication plan, how do we know if this thing is getting worse or it's getting better. And one of the things I would tell you, that it takes 3 things to cause a fire. It takes fuel, and the fuel is usually caused by a self-inflicted wound, or a disgruntled individual, customer, employee, something like that. It takes heat, right? And the heat comes from the reaction that you get from, the community, what's going on in social media now, which becomes a huge issue. And the other thing is oxygen. And what you need to solve for is, how do we eliminate fuel and oxygen to extinguish the fire? So your group, your checklist, all the things that you put together are designed to put the fire out. And you have to be very deliberate, but you have to have a plan. Pilots have a plan. They have a checklist for emergencies. Can I just share this one quick example? On January 15th, 2009, you all know this story. 150 passengers, 5 crew members boarded a plane, a US Airways flight 1549. I think it was going to North Carolina for a bunch of golfers that were on that plane that day. At 2,800 feet, they flew through a flock of birds and immediately lost all thrust. The pilot and co-pilot, Chelsea Sullenberger, who has become famous, they did a movie called Sully, and some of you may have seen the movie. He saved that day 155 lives, including his own, because of training, because of preparedness, and because we have 2 brains, right? We have the thinking brain and we have the feeling brain. And he used his thinking brain because the feeling brain works on emotion. And if you knew we're going down, people don't make such great decisions. That day, he made a great decision to not turn back to LaGuardia Airport or to go to Teterboro. And they ran this simulation over and over and over again, and the NTSB and the FAA determined they could get back there until he introduced what they called the human factor, that you have to process information just like we all do during a crisis. It takes time to do that, right? And while he was doing that, he was determining with his experience and his training the best course of action to save the other 154 souls on board. When it was all said and done, and I'm almost done, when it was all said and done, the NTSB asked the first officer, and they concluded that they made the right decision. If you had to do it all over again, would you change anything? And without missing a beat, he simply said, yes, I would have done it in July.
He was dying to tell that joke, by the way. Kelly, what about you?
Yeah, I absolutely have a plan. The other thing, I think it also has to do with preparation. Know your purpose as an organization, know who it is you serve, and that should guide every decision you make and how you're going to react to the crisis.
That was great. Thank you. Thank you, Sherry.
I'll just say practice, 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 practice 10 times more. You know, like any good team, you don't want to be learning on the field on the fly. So you really, really, really want to practice. And it's hard to make the time to do it, but so critical.
That's great. Thank you. And I know a few of you submitted some questions before, so I'm going to read 2 of them. The first one is from Lori Frazier. Hey, Lori, raise your hand. You snuck in there. Yeah. Lori, oh, she's way back there. Yay, Lori. Lori is the CHRO for PAX 8. Her question is, and Sherry, if you wouldn't mind taking this one, how can we influence sea levels to prioritize crisis planning?
You have to be clear and you really have to connect the dots. So there's crisis planning and there's risk planning, and I'm actually going to talk about them at the same time in the same way. So you have to say, here's something that could happen. And when we've looked, we do all of these risk assessments and we plot all this stuff out. And we say, here are things that we think are top 10 and could really be incredibly impactful to the company. And so you have to say, this is what the risk is. This is how we got to this being the risk. And it's not just the risk organization, this is how the business got to this being the risk. Here's how this connects to our strategy. And it's very clear the impacts that this could have on our strategy. And then you have to just say over and over and over again, this is what we're doing about it, or this is, you need to be aware of this concentration risk in this place. This is probably not something that we can change today, but let's look forward. And when you're clear, I mean, I'll go communication, cooperation, transparency, and consistency. So if you want to get your C-suite involved, give them the information in a way that's easily digestible, is consistent, and they understand the consequences, and they can understand what it means very, very quickly. And then have a lot of discussion about it.
Really, really good. Want to add to that, Mark?
Yeah, just to add one thing, sometimes we look at problems and not the opportunity that comes with the problem. Nordstrom built their business on customer service. Like when someone has an issue or a wardrobe malfunction, what they do about it builds that relationship. Every crisis, and as I said at the outset, is an opportunity, because people aren't going to judge you by what happened. They're going to judge you how you respond. If you're in the C-suite and you're not prepared, this is your moment. COVID was a moment, actually, and we saw, leaders around this country. Some people handled it extremely well, and others, it was an utter failure. And those that handled it well, we came away with a whole different impression of that individual, right? Because a crisis destroys trust. And if you know that, why wouldn't you invest at the C-suite level in a plan to build bigger and greater trust with your customers, with your employees, for when, not if, a crisis does hit you?
That's great, thank you. The next question is from Jessica Hobbs. Yay, Jessica, raise your hand. Woo, Jessica, yay, Jessica. You don't remember writing this? Surprise. And Callie, actually, you'd be really good for this one. What adjustments to your leadership style did you make personally in order to more effectively lead your team through crisis?
Great question. Yes, really good. I believe in adaptive leadership. And so in any situation, you have to be able to assess the situation and pick up what people are going to need from you in that moment. And so I think that's the adaptations you make. Some people, you may look around your team and see that they're very emotionally distraught by what is going on. You need to approach them to recognize, to acknowledge, I see you're upset. Do you need to share anything? And at least let them get those feelings out, because they're there. And if they can't experience those emotions, they can't move past them to start to do the work that needs to be done. Some people are going to need you to say, this is what we're doing X and we're doing Y, and I need you to do this. And that's what they're going to need to start moving. And other people are going to want to argue about what's the best course of action, and you need to engage them in that. Now, at some point, you're going to have to make a decision, so you have to do all that pretty quickly. So I think those are where the adaptations come. I think for me personally, I like to move fast. I'm not going to look at Cindy or Jen because they know this and they're making a face right now, but I like to move fast. I like to make decisions. I like to move on. I don't like to spend too much time dwelling on what we need to do and how we're going to do it. Just, we need to do this. Let's figure it out. Let's go forward. And I've had to slow down. I also have a technique. I sit on my hands, and that's my technique to shut up. And when I sit on my hands, it's a physical sign to myself to just listen and to let people say what they need to say and hear what and repeat back, this is what I heard, and then be clear about, and this is the decision that we have made, and this is why, and this is what we're going to do.
That's great.
That's what I've done.
I see a lot of you that like, yeah, taking notes on that one. We have time for one or two more questions. Does anybody else have a question? Oh, go ahead, Patty.
This is kind of a tough one, because what you guys have talked about are the crises that come from outside. They're the things that happen to you as an organization and how you respond. Can any of you talk about when the crisis comes from within and being accused of things from within that may or may not be true, but you have to deal with the internal struggles and the media that surrounds someone suing you for something. So yeah, this is the hard stuff, but this is the stuff that's actually the worst crisis, because it's acknowledging that you are being attacked from internally, and then often the media takes that and assumes that it is true, whether it is or not. So just, how about that internal crisis?
So who do you want to throw
Wow.
under the bus? Everybody's
So-
pointing towards
so-
Mark.
So I'm not gonna give any specifics associated with this, but it happens. And let me just, without talking about any specific issue, organizations deal with this all the time. And it comes back to fundamentally that how you deal with it, like your actions, right, say everything that anyone needs to know about you. Talking about that employee or that individual that caused the problem actually is not a good strategy. That even if it's wrong and they're incorrect, the first response is to sort of get defensive. And sometimes that's just not the right response. There's all sorts of defamation and, libel, slander, depending on the medium that they use to do those things. But oftentimes the best solution in a situation like that, I don't want to make this sound like you just sit there and take it, but sometimes it's to reflect on the message, and to, try to think through, something must be true if someone got to a point where they're saying some of these things. There must be something that could have caused it, even if the very thing they're saying is untrue. What did we do wrong to make someone feel so bad that they would have thoughts like that? And then I think you just take high road, and try and learn from it. And oftentimes we say, judge us by what we do, not by what we say. And really that's the best measure of an organization. Judge us by what we do and not by what we say.
And I love that, Mark, that looking internally first. And even if you don't lead through a crisis, the organization, if it's a team you're leading, if something happens, that's the best thing that you can do, is ask yourself, how have I contributed to the team conflict or whatever it is? We have time for one more. Oh, go ahead. It was Mark, right? Did I remember that?
So, looking back at your careers, as you stepped into environments where you were fresh to dealing with crises, I know Mark would say, "Oh, this, maybe before you'd ever heard Sully Sullenberg." But who was someone who you looked at as a role model as you stepped into those moments and going, "Holy crap! I'm now dealing with crisis on top of everything else I was doing with my job." It kind of may give you some inspiration or direction for how you progressed.
That's great. Sherry, would you mind taking this one?
Sure. So before I came to Western Union, and this month it's 10 years that I've been here, I spent 20 years in telecommunications. And so I had the privilege to work at US West and then Quest, and then before that at Hawaiian Telephone. So crisis from within, we had our CEO go to jail. And we had shareholder lawsuits and class action lawsuits and you name it, it was a mess. And a team came in, a new CEO and a new CFO. They came out of retirement from Ameritech, which no longer exists. It was part of Verizon. It's now part of Verizon. And the company was literally about to go bankrupt. And Oren Schaefer, who was the CFO, and this was his third time out of retirement, he brought all of our creditors into a room at the Marriott downtown. And he said, we're going to be out of compliance with all of our covenants, and you all can basically foreclose on us, and it will put us out of business. And we'll file for bankruptcy, or you can work with us. And if we do not file for bankruptcy, so for many of you who have lived in Colorado a long time, there are probably over 100,000 people who have worked in what was the Quest region, who were on pensions and who had their 401ks and who had their life savings. And if we had filed for bankruptcy, all of that would have been gone. And Orange stood up in front of all the big banks and said, you can either work with us or you can sink us. And here's my plan. And then we worked like crazy to deliver on the plan. We made very tough decisions. We sold our Yellow Pages business, and we did not file for bankruptcy. And so people are still benefiting from those decisions. And I mean, it was remarkable. And the morale at the company at the time was unbelievably terrible. And Dick Notebart started the Spirit of Service. And it was not about, in this case, it was not about our customers. It was about our employees and what we did to go out and keep everybody's phone systems up and running. And he completely rehabilitated the brand and the morale, and we didn't go bankrupt.
Oh, that's a great hometown example. Really good. And do you notice how Sherry used the term we? She kept saying we. Remember when she kept talking about collaboration and how important it is during crisis? He was a good role model because you still say we, and it's wonderful. Well, I want to make certain that you guys have the opportunity to continue to enjoy everything out there. Do thank Claire, because this is the first time that she was able to convince people to Western Union to open the event. It's the first external event they've had since before COVID. So make certain to thank her for making it happen. And then Amanda, you're going to wrap this up.
So thank you, Claire. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Western Union, for having us today. It's been such an honor to be with all of you. We welcome you to stay and have drinks, and there's plenty of snacks in there still too. Some takeaways for me today: have a plan. Remember the human factor, and I think this applies for us as leaders as well as thinking about our customers and our clients and the human impact during crisis, right? And the transparency piece is so key. So thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Mark, for joining us tonight. This has been terrific. And thank you, Anna. I hope everyone has a safe journey home. It looks like there is a little bit of snow out there. Fall has finally decided to arrive, but we welcome you to stay and enjoy each other's company and continue the conversation. Thank you.